Certainly. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us for our second edition of our mental health series with Dr. Elise DeBro-DeMarco. And Dr. DeMarco is a clinical psychologist specializing in working with stressed moms. If anybody like that is on here. She received her BA from Yale University, PhD from Rutgers, and has extensive training in cognitive behavioral therapy. Her first part of this series was extremely interesting, and we had a lot of good commentary. So we're looking forward to hearing more about how we can take care of ourselves during this period of crisis. So Elise, go ahead, take it away.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Erica and Tara and the Junior League of Summit for having second of this three-part series. I want to say too that we're going to do what we did for the first talk, which is we'll all talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. And it was great last time. We had a lot of questions. And I should say also that the questions don't have to be just about what I'm talking about. Really, any sort of COVID, anxiety, mental health question is fair game. So feel free. So I'm going to talk today about how to continue to care for yourself during this time, which has been a tall order for everybody. Just a little bit of background on me, and Erica kind of gave you some. So I'm a clinical psychologist. My office is in Summit, although right now my office is my house, but I'm usually in Summit, and I specialize in CBT. I'm the author of a book called Mom Brain, which is coming out in 2021. And I have two boys who are 6 and 9, and that's just a little bit about my education, which you heard about from Erica. I want to start out the talk by emphasizing what self-care is and what self-care is not. These are the things that I think about when I think about self-care, especially now. First, doing whatever it is you need to do to maintain your own mental and physical health. And again, mental health as important as physical health. Putting yourself on your priority list. And notice I don't say put yourself as the top of your priority list or, knock everybody else off your list. It's just about just putting yourself on there, period. Considering your own needs as you're considering the needs of, all the people that you love. Self-care is definitely recognizing when you've had enough. And that's a big issue here during COVID, right? To be able to say, I've had it. And maybe then you give your kids iPads or you turf something to a work colleague or something like that. It's important to recognize when you're at capacity. Another super, super important aspect of self-care, particularly now, is having a consistent schedule and a routine. And we're going to talk about that a lot because I think it's one of the most critical things you can do for yourself right now. And finally, self-care is creating a separation between work and home, which needless to say is a tricky proposition at the moment. So here's what self-care isn't. It is not selfishness. And way before COVID, I work with a lot of moms, and for years I've been hearing, well, I can't possibly do things I need to do for myself because it's selfish, right? It's selfish of me to take time for myself when I'm, an employee and a parent and a spouse and whatnot. That's simply not true. Selfishness is when you put yourself before everybody else, when you ignore everybody else's needs, when it's all about you. Self-care is just making sure that the things you need, you're getting, right? Because you can't care for anybody very effectively if you're not caring for yourself. I mean, I like to think that goes without saying, but I don't think it does. Self-care is not manicures and pedicures. It can be for some people, but I think a lot of times when self-care is discussed in the media, it's portrayed as, oh, go out and get a mani or pedi or a massage, and that's self-care for you. First of all, that's not self-care for everybody. Not everybody likes getting manis and pedis and massages. And certainly we can't even get them now, even if we wanted to. That's also what self-care is about, because manicures and pedicures and massages are things that you get on an infrequent basis, right? But self-care is not a one-time thing. You can't get a manicure and feel instantly rejuvenated and have that feeling last for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You have to make self-care a regular part of your routine and your day in order for it to be at all effective. I'm sure you guys have all experienced this, where you go out for a massage, you feel really great until you come back home and everything piles back on top of you and you're like, I don't even remember what that massage felt like. So self-care has to be a regular part of every day. I also want to emphasize that what self-care for me may not be for you, and vice versa. I think once COVID started, a lot of prescriptive pieces came out in the media kind of telling us what we needed to do. And by the way, I wrote some of those, so I'm guilty of this as well. I think a lot of us we're very quick to say, you need to do this and this and this and this. And in truth, everyone is dealing with this in their own way. And again, what's caring for me may not feel like caring for you. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. Zoom calls is a great one. So at the beginning of this, of course, there was lots of talk about getting on Zoom and FaceTime and seeing and talking to the people you loved, right? And that's what it was about. You've got to combat isolation, you know, and you've got to socialize, and this is how you do it. Again, I wrote some pieces talking about that, but what I found myself was that the Zoom calls and the FaceTimes were actually more stressful than they were relaxing, for two reasons. Personally, I talk to people for my job, and I now talk to screens for my job. So when I'm done doing my job for the day, I don't want to talk to any more screens, even though I have family members and friends who I love dearly. Also, I don't know, for those of you who have kids, how your kids do on FaceTime and Zoom, but my kids hate FaceTime and Zoom, and they have since the beginning of time, which means that to get them on to talk to the relatives they love tremendously, by the way, is torture. So for me, I said, you know what, these regular Zoom check-ins, like, they can't be a part of my self-care because they don't work for me, but they work for a lot of people very well. Similarly, there were a lot of calls for people to start a strenuous exercise regimen once this all started. That works for some people, but not for others. Grooming's another one, right? So some people are like really thrilled to walk around in pajamas. Other people say, you know, for my self-care, I've got to get my hair and makeup done, and I've got to get dressed every day because that's how I feel like myself. So you really have to figure out what works for you personally in terms of your own self-care. And what I suggest that you do is take some time when things are relatively quiet and, you know, people aren't asking much of you, and try to create your own self-care list. And there's a couple things you want to consider when you're putting things down on this list. You want to consider, first of all, the things that help you feel like yourself. So one of the things that's hardest about this time is that we've lost a lot of the things that help us feel like who we are, right? Because so much has been taken from us. We're not, you know, if we work, we're not necessarily going to an office anymore. Maybe we're not pursuing hobbies that we always pursue, or we don't have, you know, time or space to do the things we're used to doing. The result of this, right, is that we sort of lose track of ourselves and who we are. And it's so important to try to retain some sense of your identity during this in any way you can. And again, I think it's important to think about that in terms of self-care. I'll use myself as an example again and say that I used to do a lot of musical theater. For me, that's soothing. I found myself singing around the house a lot during this time. I don't know how my family members feel about that, but because for me, singing reminds me so important during this time of uncertainty for all of us. Certainly things on this list there should be that help you recharge. And that again is different for different people. You've got to figure out what for you helps to sort of like, you know, rejuvenate you a bit in time to face the next stressor of the day. Another thing that's important to consider are things that help you feel productive and setting achievable goals. What I want to note about this, though, is I'm not talking about work here. And certainly it's great if you can meet work goals. It's very hard to do when we're working from home, and that's great. But what I mean is to try to set small goals that you can accomplish and feel good about during this time. Another thing that COVID has taken away from us is a sense of control, right? So much is out of our control right now. So many things are uncertain. So to try to set small goals for yourself that involve you being able to control something, control an outcome, and see that outcome through to its completion, that is super important right now. And again, this can be anything. This can be a gardening project where you decide, all right, I'm going to plant some stuff and watch it grow and feel good about that. You might, you know, say, all right, now is the time I'm finally going to go up to the attic and go through all those bins of baby clothes. You might set yourself some sort of, you know, goal with your Fitbit and say, I want to, you know, meet a certain number of steps each day. Again, it doesn't matter what it is. All that matters is that you feel like you are in control and that you have some agency, right, in making a plan and being able to see it through. Again, something so important during this time when so much is out of our control. Another important piece of self-care is alone time, right? Many of the things on our list are going to require that we have some alone time. Now, this is very tricky for us right now, especially for those of us who have younger children. And I will be talking a lot about how to, you know, how to achieve some alone time. I want to say too that you may have to get very creative when you're talking self-care, because the things that you might have done to take care of yourself before this, you may not logistically be able to do right now, right? I'll use like running as an example. So one of the patients I work with is like a marathon runner, and she's always training. She loves to run. It gives her everything she needs for her self-care, but she just can't do it right now. She just doesn't have the time. That, it's a lot of things conspiring against long morning runs. So what she started doing is using one of those workout apps. And she'll literally do workouts in her living room with her toddler next to her, right? Now, again, that's not what she used to do, but it's scratching the itch, in terms of, getting her exercise, and it's working for her right now. So you really just have to be willing to think, a lot about the items on your list and be creative, right? Figure out what you can make work for now. Self-care will only happen if you schedule it in. And if you take nothing else away from the talk tonight, I want you to take away the importance of schedules during this time. I cannot emphasize enough how important schedules are. So I'll say that schedules in general are very important, regardless of the sort of the self-care piece, because again, our days are shapeless and we need to give them some shape. For those of you who have children, you'll recall that when your kids are really young, all the parenting books tell you, you've got to set a schedule and routine for your kids, right? So that they know what to expect, so that it reduces their anxiety, so that it helps them feel like they can predict things. The same is true of adults. We need that too. And we especially need that now, given that our days have no form or shape. So what I've been recommending to people is to try to set a schedule for the next day the night before. I say the night before only because, things are changing every day, and weather is inconsistent. And so it helps to just be able to look out one day ahead, I think. So the night before, take a moment, take out the calendar app on your phone or on your computer and look at your day. And there's a couple things you may have to consider depending on your particular situation. So if you are somebody who is working, you'll have to consider your work schedule, right? So when do I have Zoom meetings? Are there tasks that I need to accomplish tomorrow? When do I have to get those done? And so on. If you're a parent, depending on the age of your kid, you'll probably have to schedule in some time with the kids too. Again, parents with teenagers is sort of a different story, but parents of younger kids, especially those of us who have to supervise the at-home learning, we've got to put that on our calendar too. When am I going to be sitting here, helping my kindergartner learn about shape and volume? So then once you've got that laid out and you have a sense of, okay, this is what my work requirements are, this is what my parenting requirements are, see if there's anywhere in there that you can get a little time for yourself. And I promise you can find it, I promise. See what you can do in terms of what your work schedule looks like, what your parenting schedule looks like. There are some things that you can do to make it easier to find a time. Number one, think about blocking out a regular time in your work schedule. And if you can, do this every day. And if you need to do it a week ahead of time so that other colleagues don't schedule meetings for you, do it. I highly recommend doing this because I think you need a break in your workday. Normally, we do things, as a break in our workday. We go out for lunch, or we go to a friend's cubicle and chat with our friend for a little while. We do a lot of things to give us a bit of a break. At home, we might not be doing anything, and it's really important that we do. So I recommend, as I said, the night before and even maybe the week before, blocking out some time. An hour is great, but even half an hour will do, in the middle of your workday, that you can do something for yourself, something from your list, right? Your self-care list. If you're parents, it's trickier. It's trickier to get self-care time. It's trickier to get any time. But I have a few thoughts and ideas that I've been sharing with patients that I'll share with you guys. Some stuff can happen more easily if you prep ahead of time. So for example, if you see your schedule and you see, 3 to 4, I feel like I have a break there, like the kids will be done with their school, we can sort of like make it work then. But 3 to 4, that's always when the kids are begging me for snacks. One thing you can think about doing is make snacks the night before. Put them in the fridge. Tell your kids, hey guys, 3 to 4, I'm off the clock. Obviously, you have to have somewhat older kids for this, but I'm off the clock from 3 to 4. There's snacks in the fridge. Go get them. Similarly, if you want your kids outside for a period of time while you're doing something else, say, hey guys, I put all the sports equipment out in the yard, go to it, right? So that way you're sort of planning ahead so you can minimize the likelihood that you get interrupted. Not, of course, eliminate it, but at least minimize it. There's 2 other things that you can do if you're a parent that can really help you, but that require more of a discussion. So I have a slide on each of them. One of them is using strategic screen time. And one of them, if you have a partner, is using your partner. Okay, so let me start with strategic screen time. Last time when we spoke 2 weeks ago, I got a couple of questions about screen time, understandably so, and I promised that I'd cover it a little more in depth today. Even before COVID started, I've always been a fan of what I've termed strategic screen time, meaning using screen time strategically to help you, and frankly, to help your kids too. Screens as a general rule are not evil, and I do think they can benefit both you and your kids. So for you, screen time means guaranteed time that you have to yourself. And even if you have a really little one, you could put a little one in front of Sesame Street, and right next to the little one, do some reading or watch your own thing on a screen or do a little workout app, right? So it guarantees that you have some time that you can use for yourself. It's also helpful for kids. I mean, as stressed as we are, we've got to remember that our kids are stressed as well. And they also need self-care. They also need time to unwind, right? And screens provides that to kids. And in fact, with older kids, those of you who have older kids know, that's a way kids are socializing now, right? I mean, not only on FaceTime, but like kids are playing video games together. And it's a way for kids to connect socially, when it's very difficult for them to do that otherwise. So screens can actually be great. The trick is to set boundaries on screens, right? And that's where I think you can bring the schedule back into play, right? What I've been recommending my patients do is schedule in screen time. Personally, I think it's easiest if you do it at the same time every day, but depending on your particular situation, depending on the age of your kids, this could all vary. So you've really got to figure out how to make it work for you. But schedule it in every day. The benefits of doing that are several. Number one, it lets you know when you will get your break, right? It lets you know the night before, here's when I'm going to get to tackle my self-care list, and here's what I'm going to do, right? It also tells your kids what to expect. So for example, if you have screen time towards the end of the day, and it can be several hours of screens, I'm not saying, limit them to 15 minutes. It can be several hours, but if you say, hey guys, screen time is X time at the end of the day, that's a good motivator to get them to do their schoolwork earlier in the day. And B, it also hopefully eliminates them asking you every 5 minutes all morning long, when are my screens? When's my iPad? When are my screens, right? They know when to expect it. So again, I'm a big fan of screen time to enable, the parents of the world to get some relief and to take care of themselves. You just want to be strategic about it and set boundaries on it. Okay, the other getting some alone time point I want to make is asking your partner for help. Now, first of all, this supposes that you have a partner. And for those who are single parents, unfortunately, this is not even an option. For those of you who do have partners, I think it's important to consider how you and your partner can work together to make sure that you are getting the time you need. I've been talking a lot to parents about this issue as COVID has been going on. And I'll say that there's an unfortunate trend where it seems that with couples who live together, one seems to be getting the bulk of the household and childcare responsibilities and the other doesn't. Sometimes it falls along the lines of, okay, well, one partner works and the other doesn't. So the partner who doesn't work is sort of assuming all the household stuff and all the kids stuff. But I have plenty of patients who work and their partners work, and yet still one of them is getting overburdened with the kid stuff, with the household management stuff. This is a big topic, and I could say a lot about it, and I'll say a little about it, and we'll talk, I'm sure, more during the question and answer period. What I've been telling people is, even if you are a stay-at-home parent, right, and you have historically been a stay-at-home parent, you usually get a break, right? Even if you have really, really little kids, most likely your kid's in some kind of nursery school, at least for a couple of hours a week. You're probably in some sort of play group where your kid goes off with other kids and you get some time to talk to adults. Maybe you have a babysitter who comes in every once in a while. You're getting some time by yourself, even if you're a full-time parent. Now, you're getting no time to yourself, right? There are no babysitters, there are no play groups, there are no, nursery school classes. You are getting no time. And you need time desperately. So, the patients that I work with who are stay-at-home parents who are like, well, this is my job. I'm like, no, this is not your job. Formerly it was your job when you got some breaks, but now you have no breaks and you need to use your partner to help you get breaks. Similarly, with my patients who work and their partners work, I'm like, listen, you work too, right? And you need some time to get your own work done, and you need to prioritize your work too. I've heard all kinds of things. People will say, well, no, my partner's work is a lot more stressful, or it's a lot more demanding, or my partner makes a lot more money. I hear that, but at the end of the day, you cannot be a 24/7 parent, right? You need some assistance. I've also, been saying to a lot of people that, like, you may have sort of entrenched roles, you and your partner, but you know what? If there was ever a time to mess with those roles, now's the time, right? Because the world exploded and everything has been upended. And so it's actually a really good time for your partner to start practicing doing a little more of the parenting stuff and the household stuff. What you need to do, though, if this is something that you feel you need in order to get yourself some self-care time, is you need to talk to your partner very frankly about this and say, hey, this is what I need. I need some time off, and talk to them very specifically about what they can do to help you, to spell you during the day, right? And maybe your partner decides to take a quote lunch hour, and during that time, they're on the kids while you're taking a break. Maybe your partner decides, you know what, I'm going to finish up my work and then I'm going to put you off the clock and I'm going to do the bedtime stuff. Whatever it is, obviously, you work it out according to what works best for you. But it's really, really important that you ask for this if you are 24/7 parenting, because it is simply, it's simply not sustainable, and incredibly stressful. And then again, you have no time to care for yourself. So I can say a lot more about this, but I'll pause for now. And if you have questions, please ask them. The last thing I wanted to say before we start talking through some questions is I want to talk about setting a work-life boundary for those of you who work, which again is so critical. I don't need to tell you, if you work, that thanks to COVID, work life is encroaching on home life and vice versa, right? I mean, there's no boundary between the two universes. What I'm finding also is that, I work in Summit, right? So a lot of my patients commute into the city and they'll say, well, yeah, now I have, 3 extra hours that I didn't have. I'm not commuting, but what a lot of them are doing is just working 3 extra hours, or they're not taking a lunch hour as they might if they're working in an office, and they're working through that hour. To me, those extra hours are found time, and you need to use those for self-care for sure. So one of the things I mentioned already that you can do with work is set aside a time every day, block it out in your calendar in the middle of your workday or at some point in your workday that you're taking a break. Super important. What I want to say also is you've got to cut off your work at the end of the day. It's super critical that you do that. 2 weeks ago, somebody asked the question about sleep, how difficult it's been to sleep during this time. And I mentioned then that one of the things we really need to aim to do is to shut off an hour before we plan to go to sleep, right? Meaning all devices down unless you're using them for something uniformly pleasurable. I don't know that I count social media scrolling in that. All devices down, power down work, do something totally relaxing for an hour before you go to bed, right? What this means is you've got to shut off your work an hour before bed. And also you should have a regular bedtime. I'm not saying work till 1 a.m. and then, relax till 2 and then go to bed. Set a bedtime that makes sense to you. And an hour before then, shut it down. Shut down your work. I don't care what you need to do. You've got to do that for yourself. And you've got to do that to make the transition to sleep, and just make the transition back to your regular life. So that's, I'm going to stop there. I have a lot more to say on a lot of these topics, but again, I really want to hear what you guys have to say and answer any questions you have. And this is all my information too. Contact me at any time, phone, social media, all that kind of stuff. And I will turn it over to you guys for questions. Oh, let me stop my screen share. There we go. Okay.
So we can either put the questions or the chat box or just ask directly. We've got a small enough group that we can ask directly. And Elise, I've got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with boundaries like crazy. So I'm wondering, I like the tip about putting time in the calendar, and then of course I always allow people to write over it, and I know that's my issue. But do you have other tips and tools of setting those boundaries and really holding to them, especially like the work-life balance thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Those
do.
3 found hours for me are, on my chair in my office, which isn't fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think there's a few things you can do. The first thing I think is if you use your schedule and you plan ahead of time, I think that can be really helpful, because then you know what it is that you're going to do, right? So as opposed to saying, oh, I kind of have a dip in my workflow right now, like maybe I can go outside for a walk or whatever. If instead you have on your schedule, 3 p.m. to 3:30, go for a walk, you'll be far more likely to get out of your chair and go, because you've planned it, right? You plan to do it ahead of time. I'm also a huge fan, and again, this all predates COVID, but is super useful during this time as well. I'm a big fan of like setting alarms for yourself. So like putting alarms on your phone that go off that basically tell you, you got to get up and move, right? Or get up and do something different. So I'm a full supporter of that as well. And again, it's helpful if you do that schedule the night before, because you can say, all right, 3 o'clock is my time for a walk. I'm going to set an alarm on my phone to go off at 3 o'clock. And that's going to remind me that I need to do that. Another thing I recommend as well, some people I work with will say, oh yeah, what I like to do for a break is I like to, just sit and mess around on my computer, right? I think that's a problem now, because that's keeping us on our computers, right? So if our break is messing around in our computer, like we're still on our computer, we're still seeing emails come in, social media is a real mixed bag, even in the best of times now, now that it's the worst of times, I think it's even more tricky. So I would definitely recommend whatever you're doing for self-care, be away from your computer. So you physically have to get up and move. I think that too is a good way to create boundaries, because I don't think the mindless surfing of the web that we used to do really works now. Because I think it's too difficult to create that separation otherwise.
Thanks.
So hopefully that answers your question, Tara.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Other questions, or if you don't want to say them, you can just type them in. There's a chat box, if everybody sees sort of below, on the menu bar there below. And like I said, we can also talk about things unrelated to today's talk. Anything that's sort of mental health related is a good thing to ask. And I can certainly talk more, but I'd rather get questions. I heard somebody say something.
Rachel, I have a question about scheduling screen time. So I have almost 11-year-old son who gets his work done very quickly in the morning. My daughter is younger, and I spend I don't work, but I spend all day with her, helping her, because she has tons of work, and it's great, but it's a lot. But what do I tell my son to do? I mean, he talks to friends, he watches shows. I don't know what else to tell him to do other than looking at screens when, he goes outside sometimes and we have a badminton court, we play that. But when I'm not available and I'm telling him not to play with friends, what do I tell him to do?
Right. This is a tricky problem, right? And I think it's tricky for everybody, and particularly in situations like yours, because, if your energy and efforts are put towards one kid and you've got another kids doing their own thing, it's what else can occupy them? One thing that I found that has helped a lot of my patients has been to set fitness goals. As funny as that sounds, where kids have to do a certain amount of stuff outside in order to earn their screens. I will say that I have been doing this with my own sons, who are 9 and 6, and it's been working great. They both happen to have Fitbits. They're like the Garmin Vivo something Junior or whatever, which you can get relatively cheaply. But there's many other, step counter things you can get. It's been great because we've said, okay, you need to get X amount of steps before you can earn your screen time. And we make them do it in the backyard, right? So we say, okay, guys, and we sometimes we have them do relay races. Sometimes we have them, they've got they're constantly throwing footballs and running and catching footballs. I think that's a reasonable way to at least cut down a little bit on the screens and keep kids occupied. Again, it's tough for a kid to play by themselves outside, but I think if you say, hey, why don't you try doing a little running? You can run around the house. You can, again, throw a ball around, whatever it is, it'll at least maybe save you from a little bit of the screen time, and also get them out and get them moving. So that's been one thing that's worked for me and has actually worked with other people that I work with too. I see something else in the chat. Hold on. Oh yes, we use step goals and chores to earn iPad time. Yes, they are motivated. Yes. I agree 1000%, Erica. So I think working towards screen time generally is a great thing to do because the kids are desperate for it, right? They want it so badly. I told you for my boys, it's the steps. They know they've got to earn these steps. I mean, obviously if it's raining all day, we'll modify that some, but yeah, chores, I don't know, kindness. I've done that too. I've been if you're kind to your brother, you'll get extra stuff. There's, it's interesting because I think one of the things that we don't necessarily want to do a lot of right now is punish our kids, right? Because our kids are in a really difficult time as we are. So I think the best thing you can do is reward them for good behavior as opposed to punishing them for bad behavior. And there's really no end of ways you can reward them for good behavior. you know, like we'll even say, I don't know, there was one, the weeks are blurring, but there was one time where they both really wanted like baseball cards. And so we did some like chores and stuff for baseball cards. So it's sort of like rewarding them for the good as opposed to focusing on the bad behavior, which our kids are having a lot of because we all are, right? Okay, so I see a question here. My daughter's really social, but in person, she's just not enjoying the video alternatives to her extracurriculars. My son is like that too. How hard should we be pushing to keep her involved? We want her to stay engaged, but we also don't want to fight with her about things she really doesn't want to do and isn't getting anything out of. I'm leaning towards letting her out of most of it, but my husband really thinks we need to make her do more. I have to say I'm with you. You know, I think at the end of the day, what's the most important here is that our kids' mental health is maintained, right? Because when everything is stripped away, when soccer and saxophone and art class and grades and everything else is stripped away, what really matters here is that our kids emerge from this mentally healthy and resilient. And as a result of that, I think we really have to pick our battles, hardcore pick our battles, right? And figure out, all right, you know, how much does this matter? And how much will this, you know, if we force her to do this, how much will this affect her mental health, right? And how much will this stress her out? I think what we have to remember is that we're asking a lot of our kids right now. Like the homeschooling is not school. And it doesn't even approximate school, and it's very stressful for them. They don't have their friends, they don't have their teacher, they're not used to their moms and dads playing that role for them, right? So if we're getting them to do school, beyond that, I think we've got to go with, you know, what things help them recharge and the things that help keep them, you know, relatively sane, right? So I'm with you. I don't know that the pushing makes sense because there's plenty of time when this is all over to get back into activities, right? But again, I think the focus has to be on the kids' mental health.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. How about a good cry as a way to practice self-care? Yeah. I talked 2 weeks ago about emotions, generally speaking, and the fact that we need to expect that we are all going to have a lot of bad feelings right now. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago, which I entitled, "Yes, Psychologists Feel Like Crap Too," to underscore the point that we all feel like crap, at least some of the time, because we are in an unprecedented and incredibly stressful situation, right? Absolutely, a good cry can help. You know, I'm a fan of emoting of any kind. The only emoting you want to watch out for, if you are a parent, is visibly panicking in front of your kids, right? You don't want to scare your kids. And so if you are feeling visibly panicked, which many of us are, try to do that in your closet or when the kids are asleep or, you know, in your backyard. But absolutely emote because you need that. And by the way, I think it helps our kids to see us, you know, emoting and feeling, right? Because then it normalizes it for them. So, you know, you don't want to portray things as sunshine and flowers for them. That's confusing for them because it's not feeling that way, you know, for them. And so for them to see you struggling, not all, you know, all the time, but like letting them know, yeah, this is hard for me too, is really, really important. But yes, I'm a fan of a good cry, as many as you need. And again, I'm, as I spoke about 2 weeks ago, the problem becomes when you don't let yourself cry. And when you say, no, I've got to be strong for everyone else, or I've got to be happy all the time. And I have to be just so grateful that I'm safe and well. And this gratitude has to carry me. No. You can be grateful that you're well, and you can feel happy that you've got everybody at home. And yet you can still feel like a mess because things are, you know, kind of a mess right now. And it is important to acknowledge that. So yes, crying, thumbs up to crying. Other questions, either live or go ahead and type them in. Or Tara, if there's anything else you wanted me to cover that I didn't, I'm happy to do that too. Or I can even repeat some of the stuff from last time.
And this is great. Do we have other questions?
Anything else I can answer? As I said, related to what we talked about or any other kind of mental health issue too. I'll make another point since nobody's asking questions. I want to go back to the thing about your partner. I'm actually surprised I didn't get questions about that because it's been a very heated issue as I've talked to patients about it. You know, I think what's so tricky about that is that this is hard for all of us, right? And we're all kind of trying to figure out how to do this and how to work this. And if you were the one before this who sort of did most of the parenting and household stuff, that stuff comes naturally to you, you know, because you've done it for so long, and maybe your partner didn't do much of it. And so for them, there's more of a learning curve. A lot of my patients will say, you know what, like, yeah, I could ask my partner to, I don't know, do the dishes, you know, once in a while, or do the laundry, or take some of the homeschool responsibilities, but like, I don't like the way they do things, right? I like the way I do it, and they don't really know how to do it, so I'm just going to do it myself. I think that's such a problem, because what that means is then you're still left doing everything, right? Which is a problem. And then your partner never learns how to do these things, right? Like never learns how to do a good load of laundry, or that's an extreme example, but you know what I'm saying. So I think it's important, very, very important, that you have this conversation, and that also with your partner, and that you're also willing to relinquish some control over some stuff. And start to let them take the reins of some stuff. Like I said, if there's any time for upending roles, now's the time. Like another question, how can you tell your partner that you need some alone time without insulting them? I think you got to be brutally honest. And I honestly don't think it's an insult to anyone now, because I think we are all feeling the need for alone time. In fact, I texted, my brother has two kids the same age as my kids, and I texted him this morning something like, I would give everything I have to have 1 hour of quiet, right? And he laughed, but like, he's in the same boat, and I think we're all in the same boat, and we know that we've been stripped of alone time. And so I think, you know, if you want to tell your partner that, you can say, hey, it's not you, it's me, right? Use that classic line, it's not you, it's me. It's that I feel like I'm being, you know, hit from all sides all day long, and like, I need to just be in a corner by myself for a little while, or take a walk by myself for a little while. And like I said, I think we all are feeling that way. You know, those of us who live with other people are feeling that way, because we're with these other people constantly. So I'd have to imagine whoever you live with is feeling the same thing. So I don't think it's insulting. And again, I think you can preface it by saying, like, this has nothing to do with you. I've just got to, you know, get some quiet and clear my head. Yeah, I mean, again, you know, I think we're asking for a lot of stuff that we might not have ever needed to ask for before, right? Like, I had plenty of quiet before this, you know, like, all during my work days, like, I had plenty of quiet. So I never felt like, oh my gosh, I'd sell everything I own for like 30 minutes of quiet. But, you know, again, we're all facing stressors that weren't there before. So we've got to figure out how to manage them. Anybody else, any other questions I can answer? Either, again, you can tell me live or put them in the chat. Or just something anyone wants me to talk more about. Oh, there's one more. Okay. I'm a stay-at-home mother, and your words validate my feelings. Oh, I'm so glad. It's so difficult to be on 24/7 and the lack of quiet. How do I work on making peace with the fact that I'm feeling this way? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Sarah, I hear you, and I have heard this so much from people that I work with. So let me just validate that, that I think so many stay-at-home parents are going through this. I think what's really important to continue to remind yourself is a point that I made earlier, that this is not typically what you do, right? So even if you're like, yeah, stay at home is that's my job, and, you know, is a very difficult one at that. This is not your typical stay at home scenario, because you're not getting a break anywhere at any time, right? The kids are always around. They're always doing stuff. And again, you have no break for their school. You have no break for their activities. Maybe you had a babysitter and the babysitter can't come anymore. So I think what you have to do is remind yourself that this is not business as usual for you. And by the way, I think just being a stay-at-home parent in general is incredibly hard. And prior to this, and there's a bunch about this in my book too, I talked a lot with parents about coming to terms with the fact that, like, staying at home with kids is very difficult, and that they shouldn't feel pressure to love it all the time, or feel like a bad parent because they don't love it all the time, because it is hard, incredibly hard. And again, now it's 3,000 times harder, because you're not getting those breaks in the day. So I think that's where you make peace with it. I think you've got to remind yourself that even in the best of circumstances, being a stay-at-home parent is really stressful. And now, again, that it's the worst of circumstances. Listen, like, we all love our kids. I love my kids tremendously. And I told you this morning, I texted my brother and was like, get me out of here. And the trick is for me not to say, oh my gosh, what kind of mother am I? How could I have texted my brother that I wanted to get away from my kids? If you're thinking of yourself in those terms, you'll feel awful all the time. Instead, you've got to remind yourself, yeah, I love my kids, but these are incredibly stressful circumstances that, like, none of us were made to be under. We weren't made to be 24/7 parenting, none of us. And so I think just reminding yourself of that rather than saying, oh, I'm not a good mom, or I should be enjoying this time. I'll throw in, one other point about that. A lot of my patients have been telling me, oh, well, I've seen on Instagram, friends of mine posting saying, oh, what a wonderful time this is to reconnect with my children, or like, what a glorious thing. Or I'll go walking with my friends and they're like, this is so wonderful to see my kids like this. I'm like, I tell all these patients, I'm like, I don't believe it. Like, I don't believe it. Maybe there are moments of bliss and maybe there are Instagram worthy moments. We've all had them. But it is not like this all the time for anybody. It can't be. Because we are, none of us, again, getting a break, getting to do what makes us feel like ourselves, and so on. So I'd be careful about social media too, and comparing yourself to other parents, because I think that only leads to problems. And I don't believe any parent who's saying that right now is a blissful time. Erica just said, "Oh my God, I don't say that ever." Okay, hold on. 2 just came in. Okay, this is a good one. I have a 13-year-old who wants alone time, but she has an 11-year-old brother, and I'm struggling with how to have us all do family things at night without feeling like we're forcing her to do them. Yeah. This is like a big one too. It's tricky, right? Because I think, again, a lot of the prescriptive pieces that have come out during this time have been about family time. Take family walks, go on family bike rides, be a family, be together, we need each other. I get that, but kids also really need space. And in particular, the age of your daughter, she's 13, right? I'll do like a quick side note on teenagers, and especially young teenagers, where you got to remember that developmentally, right, they're at a point in their lives where they are breaking away from parents. That's developmentally appropriate, right? They want to spend more time with friends. They want to spend less time with parents. So if you think about being a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid during this time, developmentally, everything in your body is telling you, go hang with friends, distance from mom and dad, and you are stuck in the house 24 hours a day with your parents and siblings without your friends. So you can imagine, what a developmental challenge this is for kids of that age. So that all being said, I don't think you push her on the family time. See if you can, you may even want to say, hey guys, on the weekends, how about, on a Saturday and a Sunday, we devote a little bit of time to do something as a family, right? Maybe there's a Saturday morning something we do and a Sunday afternoon something we do, or something like that. So that way you're getting some family time, but you're also not pushing it. Because, and I think siblings are tricky too. I happen to have 2 kids who get along great. They get along great and they're at each other's throats half the time right now because they're together constantly, right? So, I think for that reason too, it's important to have some alone time, to not be in your sibling's face 24 hours a day. So that's my thoughts on that. Any tips on how to help or comfort a family member who's been feeling down or stuck in a funk for a couple of days? Yeah, this is hard. Well, I guess what I would tell you generally is to go back and watch my talk from 2 weeks ago, because I think that will really help you and also maybe even your family member. Because 2 weeks ago, I talked about just the fact that bad feelings are kind of par for the course right now. It's interesting. I was working with somebody who I saw a couple of times after this all started, and then who stopped seeing me, and basically said, I need to kind of do my own thing, and therapy's not a thing for me right now. But I think the reason that she got frustrated in therapy was because she kept coming at me saying, well, I need to feel better. What can I do to feel better? I need to be happier. Like, what can I do to be happier? And I kept saying to her basically what I said in the talk 2 weeks ago, like, listen, we are in a crazy time and you're not necessarily going to feel happy right now. And again, to expect yourself to feel happy, and once again, to expect that you should be grateful all the time and all that stuff, is just adding insult to injury, because you're feeling bad and then you're feeling bad about feeling bad, right? And expecting yourself to be able to buck up and make yourself smile. I think a lot of the feedback that you need to give is that the bad feelings are understandable, and the bad feelings make sense. Now, again, that's not necessarily, a huge amount of consolation to someone who wants to feel back to their old selves right away. But what that does is, again, it keeps things from getting worse for them, right? Because and once again, as I said 2 weeks ago, if you're feeling bad and layering on top of that pressure to make yourself snap out of it and feel better, and judgment of yourself for feeling bad, that's just going to make it a whole lot worse. And so I think a lot of what we're relying on right now, at least, the CBT community, those of us in the CBT community, is what we call radical acceptance. Acceptance of things as they are right now. Now, that doesn't mean you can't also work to change things. And that's what I've, kind of based both of these talks, and my talk 2 weeks from now will be based around as well, about the things you can change and the ways that you can have some control. So you can certainly try to change things, but there's also a lot of things you have to accept. And I think the bad feelings are part of that. And I also, have found as a psychologist that people's bad, and as a person, by the way, myself too, the bad feelings tend to wax and wane during this time, and unpredictably so. And sometimes the smallest things can make you feel like 2 hours ago, my husband and I finished a crossword puzzle, and I was like, I feel like $1 million. It was a great feeling, which is ridiculous, right? At any other time, that wouldn't have registered for me. But I think you can't discount those small things that can actually make a big difference in your mood. So to remind your family member of that as well. Oh, thank you for highlighting acceptance. Yes, I'll highlight acceptance forwards, backwards, and sideways. And like I said, I mean, there's some people who don't want to hear that. Like the person that I was working with was like, where are your strategies to make me feel happy? And I'm like, I mean, in her case, she had like very small children. It was a very stressful situation. Like, I mean, I'd have to be some sort of magician to make you feel happy during this time. And I think acceptance is so important. And back to the comment about crying, letting yourself cry. I'll add to that too. There's a lot we've had to mourn because of this, right? A lot of things have gotten canceled, a lot of milestones, a lot of things we look forward to year after year. We can't see our relatives who we love. There's a lot we've had to mourn. And I think thinking of it in those terms, and maybe talking to your family member about it in those terms, is important too. Like we're mourning. There's been a lot of loss. And yes, there's been degrees of loss, right? Clearly, for those of us who've lost loved ones from the disease, that is a degree of loss that is off the charts. But there's also smaller losses that can also feel really terrible. And we've got to allow ourselves to be sad about those losses. And again, while we can continue to be grateful, nevertheless, mourn those things that we've lost. It's really important not to discount even the small losses that we've had. So I'm trying to see, I don't think there's been any other questions. I think I got everything. Any other questions I can answer for you? And like I said, if you want more on acceptance and emotions and what to do with difficult emotions, if you didn't see it live 2 weeks ago, it's on the Junior League website, right, Tara? I'm trying to think of how I got to it. There's a YouTube link on the Junior League website. It's also on my website too, where you can go and watch my talk from 2 weeks ago. And that leaned very much on, what do you do with the bad feelings that you're having, other than accepting them, which we all have to do.
And Elise, you also provided quite a lot of resources last week. So
Yes.
Thank you for that. And those are also on our website.
Yeah, so so people had been asking me last week just for some sort of general kind of CBT resources, but then some COVID specific stuff. And there's actually been, there were 2 things that I had Tara add that I think are really helpful. One of which I want to say it was called Coping with COVID. It's from, there's a CBT colleague of mine at Hofstra named Bill Sanderson. He and his lab came up with a Coping with COVID, like CBT sort of workbook, applying CBT strategies to the COVID, the COVID related anxiety and depression and all of that. So I highly recommend you check that out. And then if you're a parent, it's funny, I had recommended in the talk 2 weeks ago, you check out Emily Oster's website. That's Oster. She is she's an economist at Brown and has written 2 books about parenting. One was called Expecting Better, and one was called Crib Sheet, where she basically does data-driven guides to parenting. And she's also a great writer. She's sort of very accessible and warm. And she started a newsletter where she recently had been covering tons of COVID stuff and looking at the data, not just about kid-related issues with COVID, but all issues with COVID. The day after I gave my talk, she actually announced a new website, which Tara also put on. There's a link to on the Junior League site. I think it's called COVID Explained, and it's terrific. It's a really good source of just factual, science-based information on a variety of topics. Again, not just parenting stuff, but a variety of topics. I have found for myself, and I've been telling patients this too, that it's really helpful just to have like one source of news, if you can swing that, because there's so much coming in from so many different sources, and it can be really overwhelming. And so, like Emily Oster's stuff, I read. I don't read everything. I honestly have not been following the news terribly closely, but I will read her stuff because I know it's data-based and I know it's practical, and she's not a fear monger. And so I appreciate that. So whether it's her or finding kind of your own, source that you trust that doesn't inspire a lot of fear, I think it's really important. But yeah, please check them out. And by the way, if you have any questions for me too, when this talk is over, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via email, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. Anything else before we finish up? Any other last minute questions? These were all great questions. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much. This is, again, another terrific session. Really appreciate the tips and the tools that we can all use to be able to cope with these really just unprecedented times.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you guys again so much for having me. And like I said, if you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. One of the nice things about being a mental health provider during this time is you feel like you have some tools to help some people, which is a great feeling to have during this time when we're all feeling very helpless and, out of control. So please feel free to ask me questions. I'm more than happy to answer them.
Great, thank you.
And thank you guys.
And again, we're back for part 3 in 2 weeks, same day on Wednesday, same time, 8 o'clock. So I think that's June 3rd, Wednesday, 8 o'clock. And we look forward to seeing everybody.
Yes, it's about expectations, setting our expectations too high and how to dramatically lower them during this time.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you all so much. Take care, everybody. Stay well.